Hello, powerful people. Welcome back to the Power at Work blog and this blogcast. So great to have you back here, or welcome if it's your first time. I'm kind of embarrassed for you if it is your first time, but glad to have you anyway. Boy, you got a lot of blogcasts to catch up on. We've done a lot of them. My name's Seth Harris. I am a senior fellow at the Burns Center for Social Change. I'm your host for this discussion, as I often am. This blogcast is another in our series of labor reporter roundtables. I really like these. I talk to reporters all the time. I have immense respect for them. I think they do a very difficult job very, very well. Some of them are excellent, really terrific and smart. You have to be really smart to do that job. We had three terrific labor reporters to our long list of guests in these labor reporter roundtables today. It's an ongoing conversation about labor news, labor developments, the labor movement, and the process of covering workers and worker power and collective action and unions. This conversation that you're going to watch in just a minute was recorded during the afternoon of Monday, November 6th. So there may have been some developments since then. The news marches on, as the old newsreels used to say. We covered a long list of topics ranging from the state of worker power in journalism to the very big question about whether the current strike wave and worker power and collective action and worker activism are going to continue, whether this is the new normal that we're seeing. There was even some discussion of Israel and Palestine during the discussion, arising out of the truly terrible events that we've seen in that part of the world. I also asked the panelists to tell us about the big story of 2024, predict the big story of 2024 that we're not talking about in 2023. I think some of their answers are going to surprise you. They surprised me a little bit. Our guests for this conversation are Kim Kelly, who's an independent journalist and author and organizer. She has been a regular labor columnist for Teen Vogue since 2018. She's also the author of Fight Like Hell, The Untold History of American Labor. We were proud to review her book on the blog. After you watch this blogcast, go read the review of her book, and that will motivate you to go get her book. Go buy her book. Michael Senato is a labor reporter for The Guardian US. His writing has been published in the New York Times, of course, The Guardian, Gizmodo, The Nation, HuffPost, and a bunch of other places. Terrific reporter. And Jordan Zakarin is a reporter and producer for More Perfect Union. He writes and reports, produces, directs, and edits a variety of kinds of video pieces about politics and policy and the revived workers' rights movement in the United States. And his work is just terrific, as is the work of More Perfect Union more generally. They're really valuable new kind of news outlet. So it's a great group. It's a great conversation. But before we get to that conversation, let's talk about a little bit of labor news. Now, Kim Kelly and I, during the podcast, were talking, and we agreed that we feel like we're drinking out of a fire hose of labor news right now. There is just so much labor news that it's very hard to sort through it all and to figure out what you should lift up. So what I'm going to try to do is just focus on three stories here. I'm going to try not to repeat too much what I talked about in the last blogcast, which just dropped 2 days ago. I'm recording this, or actually, did it drop 2 days ago? It's very recent. Where I talked about, no, it dropped today. I'm sorry, I'm recording this on Tuesday, November 7th. So we put out a blogcast today. I'm recording this on the same day. I'm going to try not to repeat what I said in that blogcast. I'll cover one of the same stories, but there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot going on in labor world right now, and I think that's a really, really good thing. So the first is a story we've talked about before. I wanted to note as sort of an update on the story that SAG-AFTRA, which has been on strike since July, has not accepted the last, best, and final offer made by the Hollywood studios. The negotiating committee wrote a note to the membership, and here's what they said, and I'm quoting here, quote, "There are several essential items on which we still do not have agreement, including AI, artificial intelligence." Now, In our last blogcast, the one that dropped today, Tuesday, November 7th, I explained the options that are available to both sides when an employer makes a last, best, and final offer. They're dictated by law, the options that are available. SAG-AFTRA chose the option of making a counteroffer to the last, best, and final offer, essentially saying this is not the last offer. It may be your best so far. We think you can do better. Now we'll see what the studios do. Maybe by the time you see this on Thursday of this week, 2 days from now, you'll know how the studios responded. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. All right, second story. I think we have to acknowledge a very important collective action involving non-union workers. Non-union pharmacists across the United States have been walking off the job in a coordinated action around the country to protest unsafe working conditions and inadequate staffing at some of the largest chain stores. This action is a really important reminder to all of us who talk about labor stuff that you don't have to be union to strike. Your right to strike is protected even if you are not a union member, right? Your right to protected concerted activity is protected if you are an employee, period, hard stop. And these pharmacists that's what they're doing. They're out on strike or temporary walkouts. We know from the Cornell ILR Labor Action Tracker that non-union workers all over the country strike frequently. Now, their strikes tend to be shorter. They tend to be more focused on particular issues. They're not comprehensive strikes like, say, the UAW strike, the SAG-AFTRA strike, the Teamsters negotiations where a strike was threatened. And also, their strikes don't tend to lead to collective bargaining agreements because, of course, they're non-union, and you can't have a collective bargaining agreement unless you have a union in place. And that's one of the dangers that non-union workers face, is that if an employer makes a commitment to them in order to get them to go back to work or to not walk out again in the future, that commitment is not at all enforceable in the way that a collective bargaining agreement is. So I think it's fascinating that the strike wave is extending well beyond organized labor to non-union workers. It's extending to professionals like pharmacists, just as it's extending to professionals like teachers and doctors and others. They just feel their working conditions are made intolerable, in this case by issues that are very common in the healthcare industry. Staffing is a huge issue in the healthcare industry, and those companies really have failed to address their big staffing issues. They are short-staffed. They are not hiring workers either to maximize profit, to increase the amount of money that they're able to take out of these operations, or because they just have not developed sufficient talent pipelines. In either case, it's unfair to the workers. It's unsafe for pharmacists and other healthcare workers. So maybe the time has come for more expansive organizing in the pharmacy sector. It'll be interesting to see if we see a bunch of unions cropping up in pharmacies all across the United States. That's what this non-union action suggests may be needed, is may need unions. I think we probably do need unions in those pharmacies. Third, on the day we are publishing this blogcast on the blog, which is going to be Thursday, November 9th, President Biden is going to Belvidere, Illinois, and he'll be visiting a Stellantis assembly plant that was idled last February, but that Stellantis, as a result of negotiations with the UAW, is now going to reopen, and it's going to invest several $billion in it. And reports are, and let me just say, you don't have to be a reporter on the level of our guests in this blogcast to have figured this out. But the reports are that President Biden is going to tout the UAW's big contract with Stellantis and the other two automakers. I expect that he's also going to talk about the reindustrialization of America, the return of manufacturing jobs, the onshoring of manufacturing facilities, the big investments that are being made in manufacturing across the United States. I don't think it shows that I have any special insight. I just am predicting that's what he's going to do based on my experience and knowledge. But let me also say, I don't think President Biden is going to try to take credit for the UAW contract, the UAW's success on the picket line. He went to visit the picket line, but he didn't staff the picket line. The UAW's members did that. The UAW's members set up that picket line. The UAW's members voted to authorize the strike. The UAW's leaders set the strategy for that strike, and the members went along with that strategy. Arguably, President Biden, I think it's more than an argument, it's my view, that President Biden created the current environment that allowed success at the bargaining table for the UAW and for other unions. In fact, Bloomberg put out a report today, Tuesday, November 7th, that shows that over the course of the last 3 years, unions have done a lot better at the bargaining table than they have done since the turn of the century, the turn of the 21st century. They've gotten better wage gains. They've gotten other more significant improvements in their contracts. Now, again, I don't think the president gets all of the credit for that, but the environment has changed. The culture has changed. The politics have changed. The economics have changed. But also worker activism has changed. Worker militancy has changed. Union strategy has changed. Union leadership has changed. Union bargaining objectives have changed. It all goes together to produce better outcomes for the workers who are represented by unions and to make organizing a union more appealing to more workers. I think that's a very important point, and I'm quite confident. I have no doubt in my mind that President Biden understands that, and that he'll say some version of that when he speaks in Belvedere on Thursday, November 9th. So I'll be interested to hear what he has to say. I think he's going to be really enthusiastic. Reopening a plant, an assembly plant in Belvedere, Illinois, in parts of the country that used to be called the Rust Belt and aren't called the Rust Belt anymore because they're coming back with manufacturing jobs. I think the president's going to be pretty enthusiastic about that. And I think the UAW members who get to see him speak there also will be enthusiastic. All right. So that's labor news for this blogcast. Now on to our conversation with Kim Kelly, Michael Sonato, and Jordan Zakarin, a Labor Reporters Roundtable. Enjoy. Hey, everybody. I just wanted to drop back in with two things. First of all, I wanted to let you know that this blogcast is made possible in part by the generous support of Union Built PC, our friends at Union Built PC. They have been serving the labor movement's hardware and software needs for more than 22 years. So we're delighted to have them as one of our sponsors. Union Built PC, we organize labor. That's the first thing I wanted to tell you. The second thing is, since I recorded the introduction to this blogcast, SAG-AFTRA and the Hollywood studios have made a tentative agreement, which is good news, I think. We're going to have to get some of the details and analyze those, but the union seems to be willing to accept it, so that's good news that that strike is going to come to an end. I'm recording this on Thursday morning. We expect the strike to come to an end later today. So labor news after labor news, sort of breaking news here, first thing in the morning, Thursday. Now, let's get back to the interview. Well, let me start by saying thanks to all of you for being here today. These are among the favorite things that we do on the blog. For me, I just think it's a lot of fun. I talk to reporters all the time, and I love getting inside the reporting. And also, reporters really know what's going on, and so it's a great way to get analysis and thought and insight into what's going on in the world of labor. So I'm so grateful to all of you for being here today. Let's jump right in. I'll tell you something you all know very well, and that is that the last few months have seen the most strike activity that we've seen in a generation. And I'll just list off some of the big strikes that have either already are underway and are continuing, that just ended, or that have been threatened. Right, SAG-AFTRA is still on strike. They've been on strike since July. Hollywood is still largely shut down. I know that there is a last best and final offer from the studios right now. We'll see what ends up happening with that. Culinary Union and Bartenders Union in Las Vegas has threatened a strike. I just saw a tweet that suggests that they're planning to go on strike 4 days from when we are recording this. We're recording this on November 6th in the afternoon, so maybe as soon as the 10th, right on Veterans Day, we could see a strike in Vegas. The workers at the casino hotels in Detroit, Michigan, already on strike. National Coalition of Kaiser Permanente Unions just won a strike, got a nice, robust wage increase and some staffing guarantees. That's the big issue, as you know, in healthcare. The teachers in Portland, Oregon are on strike. 4,000 UAW members at Mack Truck are on strike. They rejected a contract that the company and their bargaining committee approved. And of course, everybody who follows the news at all knows that the UAW just settled its strike against the Big Three. 150,000 union members now will vote to ratify or not to ratify their agreements. My guess is that they will ratify the agreements with Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis. So, and let me just say, you all know better than I do, that's just a short list. There's a lot more that are out there going on right now. So my sense is that if you take all that together, something has changed. So what I'm hoping you're going to help us to understand is, what is the change? Is this hot labor 2023 as opposed to hot labor summer or hot labor spring? Or is it the new normal? And that question has led a lot of folks, including me, to write about what is causing so many strikes. Why are we having so many strikes? So I want to turn to that question. And Kim, let me start with you. What do you think has led to this generational level of strike activity? And do you think it's going to last? Is it the new normal?
Yeah, I think honestly, as the great Fannie Lou Hamer once said, to paraphrase, I think a lot of people are just fed up and sick and tired of being sick and tired. We're at this point where we've seen these big strikes, we've seen a ton of coverage around these big strikes, these big campaigns, these very familiar public facing campaigns too, whether it's the victories we've seen at Amazon or Starbucks Workers United. It's become very personal in a way to a lot of folks that maybe don't think about unions that much or aren't from a union tradition, union family. It's kind of hard to ignore at this point. And I think the more successful strikes we're seeing, the more great union contracts we're seeing, the more labor unrest in general we're seeing, that's giving more and more people, more workers, kind of almost the permission to get involved themselves. Not that anyone needs permission, but I think back to my experience when I was organizing back at my old job, and I never thought of myself as a worker or anything like that till I started talking to union organizers, and they really just shifted my whole perception of my life and my labor and the value of those things. And I think we're still seeing the reverberations of that great shift we saw earlier in the pandemic. It's been building for a long time, and I don't think it's going anywhere because first of all, workers are winning, and it's hard to argue with that. And second of all, like, people are pissed. I'm trying really hard not to mess with the PG-13 rating here. People are fed up with all the BS that we're dealing with. And I think they've just kind of realized that the only tool we really have as workers and poor people is to unionize, to work collectively, to harness that collective power, because no one else has our backs. No one else is looking out for us. All we can depend on is ourselves. And I think that's a very, very important lesson for a lot of people to have learned over the past few years.
Jordan, what do you think? So Kim's take is it's the new normal, that people are learning strikes. And I think that this is just empirically true. Strikes are a contagious condition. Folks see other workers striking and winning, and they say, hey, I can do that. My coworkers and I can do that. What do you think? Is it a new normal? Or if, for example, if unemployment goes up, does all this go away?
I think it's. I think first of all, people are pissed off. So I think Kim, just fundamentally, it's right there, and I think that's why we saw people start to unionize a couple of years ago. Those numbers went up big time, right before we saw all these huge strikes. We saw people start to unionize a lot more, whether it's Amazon or Starbucks, and I think a lot of times what happened was 2021, 2022. Now we're in like the kind of the third year of it. There were a lot of bad contracts. Also, people got stuck in bad contracts. Whether it was like the big three, whether it was people at factories that I just did one in Memphis covering them, that they are IFF, International Flavors and Fragrances. Sorry, I look at the S messed up. But they were striking because they were bought by another big conglomerate, was trying to trying to take advantage of them. And so I think there's an element of like, we had bad contracts before. The labor market's different now. We are pissed off more now because we're seeing because prices are going up and because we're being taken advantage of, and because like Kim said, people are doing it, people are seeing it. I think there is a permission structure that happens there, and it's one of the things, like, it's hard to strike. It costs people a lot of money. It's exhausting, but I think by seeing the victories happening, people stick with it longer and they're more willing to do it too. I mean, a lot of times you look at the Teamsters didn't strike, but they did threaten, and they did lots of picketing, and people at FedEx who are they have a lot of trouble unionizing because of different laws there, but they're like, wait, where's our big payday? Where's our big paycheck? You see Amazon drivers now going to the Teamsters, and they're starting to picket. And so I think that when you see the possibilities, you see the numbers that are happening at these huge companies, again with the UAW, right, and all these smaller car companies, all of a sudden the people they're not they didn't want to unionize before, but they feel like, hey, we can go out and get after it. I think that makes a big difference as well. So winning is contagious as well.
Michael, what do you think? Boy, I'm hearing a lot of optimism, and that the new labor activism is here to stay. Do you share the optimism?
Yeah, I do, especially because a lot of the big strikes have been so successful in getting a lot of gains that before the strikes were happening, the employers were putting out messaging that they weren't going to or willing to meet those demands. And next year we have some of the big contracts that expire. We have Yahtzee workers, so those Hollywood crew workers are going to be looking for the same gains the writers got. Boeing's contracts are up. Those workers are going to be looking for gains that the auto workers experienced. And being a worker, just being able to see those gains, see that activity, and see what's possible is going to have and I think what we've seen is going to have reverberating effects in organizing and strike activity, and people just being interested and supportive of unions as a vehicle to combat the greed, the profit of corporations, and the terrible wealth inequality that we've all I think I can speak for Jordan and Kim. We've all grown up having to experience and witness.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you phrase it that way. Michael and I were talking before we started about how this generation of labor reporters is younger than the last generation that was covering this kind of activity, say 25 years ago. You had a lot of longtime older labor reporters, and that's sort of fitting because you have a lot of really young workers who are playing a very, very important role in the organizing that we're seeing, the strikes that we're seeing all around the country. But Michael, I want to stick with you because I want to. You're all at risk when you come on the blogcast of having your words quoted back to you. So Michael gets that this time. So Michael, after the UAW deal was announced, you published a piece arguing, and I'll quote you. You said, quote, labor in the U.S. is still facing significant obstacles and challenges in transforming the popular culture shift into gains against the backdrop of decades of union decline, worsening wealth inequality, and broken labor laws. So elaborate on what you think those obstacles are, and I'm going to ask Jordan and Kim to respond to it. And let me actually add a second piece to your question, Michael. So what are the obstacles is the first part. The second part is part of the reason you think this is the new normal is that you're seeing unions overcome the obstacles.
I'm seeing unions not only overcome the obstacles, but be more willing to take them on despite those obstacles. And what I mean is, the political obstacles we face, and fixing the broken labor laws we have in the U.S., and holding employers accountable for violating labor laws. Right now, they're kind of doing that with impunity. And another piece of that is just the huge war chests that employers and billionaires put into union busting, the union avoidance consulting industry, misinformation, lobbyists, that are, pushing, anti-worker laws. We've seen it on the child labor front. A lot of red states rolling back child labor protections. I live in Florida. DeSantis passed earlier this year a law that attacks public unions. And so, in the U.S., union density has been declining, and because of the workforce grows so much, you need to add more workers to that to even just keep it from declining. So those are some of the obstacles, the demographics, the political landscape, just the gridlock, the fact that we're dealing with a Republican Party that during Eisenhower, they weren't as nearly it's a different kind of anti-worker sentiments. We've seen it in some of just the presidential Republican primaries where every candidate was trying to attack teachers unions. So there are challenges to um, overcoming and translating that, the record support since the 60s for unions, people wanting to unionize, even labor experts have been saying this, workers want to unionize, but there's impediments, there's obstructions, there's obstacles preventing them from doing so, or preventing them from having their rights to organize in the workplace be protected. We the House passed the PRO Act, but it didn't reach the Senate. And with the political makeup, it doesn't seem like there's going to be any Republicans that are willing to sign on to any pro worker legislation. But it's going to, I think, take a lot of new organizing, a lot of funding, and some creativity to figure out how we could take that support for the labor movement and start manifesting that into gains, whether it's in states where the political landscape is easier for unions to gain some ground, or just taking the fight to specific employers, like we're seeing Starbucks workers doing it despite what they've been going through since the end of 2021.
So, Kim, same question for you. The obstacles for worker organizing are well known. You've written about some of them. Is your optimism about worker organizing and being the new normal, and strike activity and worker militancy being the new normal, does that take into account that there are all these obstacles out there? And do you think it's that the labor movement's going to overcome them, or what? Why aren't you looking at the obstacles and saying, "Oh no"?
PMA, right? Got to stay posy. You got to keep. I mean, you've got to stay hopeful, because otherwise, the only other option is giving up. Especially as someone who spent a really long time reading and writing about centuries of labor history, something that keeps me going and does keep me optimistic is the fact that none of this is necessarily new, right? Like, one could even argue that our labor laws are in the best shape they've ever been, and we know they're jacked up. So imagine how much worse things were 100 years ago, right? And I think one of the things that does interest me and give me, I guess, I suppose, inspiration or optimism in this moment is the fact that workers know that the deck is stacked against them, whether they're trying to organize at $1 billion company, or they're misclassified, or they're in an industry that doesn't have a tradition of unionizing, and they're doing it anyway. I think one of the most interesting and I think important projects we're seeing right now, I want to shout out the Union of Southern Service Workers, who are kind of operating on this solidarity unionism model that we associate more closely with the IWW. But they're a group of hundreds, if I think thousands now, of service workers at fast food restaurants and retail locations across the South. It's worker led, it's predominantly Black and brown workers in low income jobs. And they've been striking and protesting and organizing. They are interested in getting the NLRB stamp of approval. They know the labor laws are stacked against them, especially in a lot of the southern states where they're located, but they're doing it anyway. I think that attitude is something that is really invigorating in this moment. The fact that workers know, okay, laws say we can't do this, tradition says we can't do this, even labor experts or whoever says we can't do this. But what if we try anyway? Or what if we just do it? And that's the kind of spirit that has gotten us to this point throughout the centuries, right? No one has ever won a strike or won a victory or gotten us anywhere closer to progress by waiting for permission. Especially in this country, like, which, as Michael so eloquently laid out, things are not great for the American worker. It's really difficult to get anything decent done. especially in this current political climate where, God, I think probably the only thing you could recommend about a Joe Biden second term at this point is the fact that they will continue having an NLRB that actually seems to care about workers and is interested in advancing, I guess not legislation, don't really do that. The recommendations to get around some of these missteps we've seen in the legislative or like judicial, whatever, government world for decades. I mean, that's inspiring and exciting in its own way. It's kind of sad that we have to be excited about what a government agency is up to in terms of keeping the labor movement thriving, but we're taking what we can get. And thankfully, workers have realized that we can actually get quite a lot if we're willing to get creative and militant and maybe not listen to the people that tell us it's too hard or it hasn't been done before, so don't bother.
So, Jordan, is it too hard and it's never been done before, so don't bother? Is that your message? Or no, I'm joking. I'm joking, of course.
Kim won't listen.
That's right. Kim, take your earbuds out. No, but I do want to. I want to take seriously the point that Michael made, and I think that Kim is acknowledging, but is still really optimistic. And that is that, man, oh man, it's hard to organize a union in America. And goodness sakes, you are taking your career and maybe your life in your hands if you go out on strike. You're certainly risking your family's economic position if you go out on strike. Maybe less in a situation where we have very tight labor markets, very low unemployment. But you're certainly risking your relationship with your employer, and Americans are dependent on their employers for wages and a lot of other things. Your health insurance, if you have a kid who's sick, or if you have, your own health conditions, you're at real risk if you do that. The wealth and power is overwhelmingly loaded on the side of wealthy corporations and their shareholders. So how is it? Is it that workers are overcoming those obstacles? And if so, how are they doing it?
I think you're both Michael and Kim are really correct in that, like, there is this great optimism, but there are also these roadblocks, right? That you either have to go over or around. And I think we're seeing, to some degree, like, roadblocks are getting in the way. Let's say Starbucks, right? They have 300 plus stores that have been unionized, but just the brutality of the anti-union campaign, just historically awful, and it's certainly slowed things down. And NLRB can say, hey, that was illegal, and keep doing it, but until there's some teeth there, at which we need the proactive pass for to be the case, and that doesn't seem to be happening, then there will be difficulties. I mean, we see the Amazon, they had the historic victory there, and that's sort of, whether it's from internal or from both like internal and external reasons, like it's sort of fizzled a little bit. Although they had some recent action there, I was there in Staten Island, so excited to see that. So there definitely are these difficulties, right? And there's only so much the government can do. We see with the joint employer law, that joint employer rule that the NLRB just came out with, like, that will be huge if they're able to implement it, right? That will be something that where McDonald's and every other fast food franchise, whether if you work there or if you work at Amazon, but you really don't actually work for Amazon because you're working for some contractor that does the driving, FedEx, like they will be able to unionize, they'll be able to strike contracts, and so those are these great opportunities. Whether or not they can come into being, whether they can be implemented, a whole other story. But I also think that we're seeing things that Kim mentioned, a group that not even going through the NLRB, right? We see, you could add a lot of things to that. You see all the pharmacists that went out, walk out in the last couple of weeks or so. Like, there is this element of, even if you're not officially organized, you don't have a CBA, because we see the big CBA victories are coming from unions that are been there a really long time. Whether you're the UAW or Teamsters, like, or UFCW, like, they obviously already have this relationship. They're creating these contracts, but there's a lot of, like, people taking action and maybe doing it in a way that, like, avoids trouble. I've been working with a lot of pharmacists who, they are willing to, show part of their face on a sign, right, and make noise and to walk out of work, but obviously they don't want to identify themselves, which is understandable. I mean, but there is this spirit of people going after it, whether or not there is a legal, like, well, they have not the legal right to, but legal advantages to doing so. And so I think that, like, that spirit, I hope, continues, and hopefully a PRO Act passes. I mean, we I don't know what's going to happen in the next election. It doesn't seem like it's going to be a great Democratic majority, and then again, we've seen trifectas where it didn't pass anyway. So, but I also think that politicians are now having to wake up a little bit and cater to labor, whereas for a long time, labor was just sort of like the ground game for a lot of kind of crappy politicians. And so, one thing we did at MPU was try and force them out to the picket line and say, hey, you guys got to show up. And, some do it more than others and more willingly than others. There's certain governors, I think, in my home state that seem, a little bit contrived when they go there, but we'll leave that to the side. But, they have to do it. And I think we're seeing that more and more. And I think because of that, Illinois just passed like a, constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right to organize. So I think that take wins where you can get them, especially on the state level. It's going to be difficult in a lot of ways, federal level, unless some great miracle happens. But I just think the energy of people who are even going around it, like Kim mentioned, is really, really positive.
Yeah, well, this is a much more optimistic blogcast than I expected that we were going to get, but I love the analysis that all of you are giving. So I want to take on some questions that get to labor journalism, that really emphasize the journalism in addition to the labor. And I want to start with the question, are we spending too much time focusing on strikes? And one of the premises of creating this blog is that the mainstream media likes to cover labor only when there's either a lot of conflict, corruption, or politics involved, right? They like to portray unions in ways that are really not the norm for how unions operate. The norm of unions is representing workers in the workplace, collective bargaining, helping workers to get their problems in the workplace resolved, playing a role in their communities, playing a role in local politics as well as national politics. It's not all who they endorsed at the presidential level, and it's also not all about strikes. So I want to take on that question of whether we're focusing too much on strikes. And let me start with you on this, Jordan. What is the biggest and most important story about labor and worker power right now, regardless of whether you're personally covering it?
I think so. I think that in terms of strikes, I think that there's an element of there's a lot of them, which is why they're being covered. I think that it winds up, being positive. People run to the picket lines. And I think that one thing that I've really been inspired to see is the way that the leadership in a lot of the unions have changed. We see Sean Fain becoming president and a very close election of the UAW, right? We see, Sean O'Brien becoming president of the Teamsters. I guess just elect people named Sean and it's all good. USCW may have a change in their leadership, and BCTGM may. And so I think that change, and I mean, union leaders have been under siege for so many years. I'm not going to sit here and say they're all terrible, they're all bums. But I think that new energy coming into the unions has really enabled the rank and file to be much more involved, to feel much better. I remember a couple of years ago working on covering a strike where a local was very unhappy about having to settle for a contract, and just they were kind of had to push through, and that is the UAW had to push they pushed through a contract in 2018, I think. And so I think that new energy within internally and seeing union members really going for it and making sure that they have these new leaders that kind of have their backs and or at least be willing to be aggressive. I don't want to say other leaders didn't have their backs, but willing to be more aggressive, demand more, be public about it the way that they weren't before. I think that is really huge because that's kind of the key to everything in this sense. They are waking up in a way along with the workers.
Yeah, and to me, the leadership change is a reflection of a change in the way the workers are viewing the world. It's not that the leaders are changing and they're persuading workers to be more militant. The reason you have Sean Fain and Sean O'Brien is because the members of those unions, as Kim said, are sick and tired of being sick and tired, and they wanted their leadership to take that approach, I think. And you're seeing that in a lot of unions now. Michael, let me ask you, what are the stories that are the big stories that we're not talking about enough right now? What should we be, or even if we are talking about them? I mean, Jordan's point was that, certainly there was coverage of the two Seans winning their elections. What are the biggest labor stories that are out there right now that maybe are not about strikes, or are strikes the big story and that's what we should be talking about?
I think a big one right now is what's happening in Gaza and how workers are either standing up to speak out about it. There are workers who have faced and are facing retaliation just for signing on to a letter. This weekend, a New York Times magazine columnist was forced to resign for signing a letter. There was this morning. protest at the port of Tacoma, and one of the workers reportedly got off the ship, didn't want anything to do with it. In Barcelona, there were workers who refused to move weapon shipments to Israel. So I think obviously how the labor movement plays a role in these protests, and in what's going on, and how the power dynamics within the workplaces are used by employers and workers to speak out about that, and I think that's um, also kind of can have like positive effects in determining like how uh, much work impacts our lives, and I think that's what that is part of this favorability towards unions, and everything else. It's in this kind of culture shift in terms of we've seen it through the pandemic, the quiet quitting, that kind of stuff. Is just rethinking and kind of coming to a bigger understanding of how much you know what how much power each worker actually has with the labor they produce, and how they're typically you're taken for granted, culturally, just supposed to be robotic, listen to your boss, listen to what the employers say, but that's not the case, and that's not how progress gets made. So I think all those different facets are just a big thing to keep an eye on, in the coming future.
Yeah, I want to echo certainly that last point about workers feeling their power, maybe for the first time in a long time. Workers go to work in these autocratic workplaces where their opinion, if they're non-union, doesn't really matter very much. And in fact, voicing your opinion can get you fired, legally fired. And they encounter a lot of institutions in their lives where their voice just doesn't matter. Ironically, in a country that touts itself as a democracy, at least for now. And now workers are realizing that they actually do have power. They can quit their job. They can speak up. They can organize. And for a lot of workers, it's a new feeling. They have not had this experience before. They haven't seen it before. They certainly, many of them haven't seen a union before. One of the consequences of having low union density is a lot of workers are not union members, have never been union members, and don't have a family member who's ever been a union member. They don't know what it looks like and what the experience is like. And I get the sense, I agree with you in this way. They're trying it out and they're seeing it can work. All right, so let's talk about you all, your worker power, and your industry and occupation. And by that, I mean, let's talk about worker power and unions in journalism. Of course, there's been a strike going on at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette for more than a year now. There was a strike at the New York Times just the other day of tech workers, not journalists. They walked off the job because of the New York Times' return to office policy. Kim, what's your sense of worker power in the journalism industry right now? Is it just the consequence, or whatever is happening right now, is it the consequence of an industry that's just facing immense economic pressure, or is there something else going on?
I know that there's been a lot of organizing over the past few years. My union, the Writers Guild of America East, we kind of kickstarted a lot of the digital media organizing back in 2015 when my old workplace, Vice, joined a bunch of other places. And then the News Guild has really been running with it ever since. And speaking of, more progressive, reform-minded union leadership, John Sluice, I'm probably saying his name wrong. He's going to kill me. But the president of the News Guild, he is very fiery, very militant, and very supportive of strikes and of aggressive contract negotiations, and really just going for it in ways that perhaps we hadn't seen from newspaper union leadership in a while. But I think it's impossible to be someone reporting on the news and living in this moment and being part of a union and not want to get involved yourself, right? If you're reporting on other workers who are constantly trying to improve their economics and their workplaces and just seeing all the things that are happening, like of course you're going to want to get something a little bit better for yourself too. And I'm in a funny position where I'm a freelancer, but I'm in a union, but I can't really. It's like it's a weird position, independent contractor, all that. Love to be classified that way, but it's just so heartening to see my fellow journalists who are union, who are able to both report on the news and also take part in the movement. I think it's just really great. I think objectivity is fake, and it is ridiculous to expect journalists who are workers to not have some kind of pro-labor sentiment, pro-worker sentiment. Any publication that's trying to get you to do that is not worth the paper or the pixels it's printed on. Um, yeah, I want to hear what the fellas have to say. I'm just back in my Pollyanna unionize everything kind of box for this one.
Well, Jordan, let's talk about you. More Perfect Union is unionized. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, they just got a contract. The union just got a contract with management. I have to admit, I happen to know management, and they're kind of pushovers. Is my sense. They're easy to bargain with.
It was nothing. I negotiated with them. It was no big deal.
But I hope Faz is not watching this.
I'm kidding, so let's. Of course.
Yes, of course you are. He's kidding, Faz. But let's talk about the industry more generally. The information industry, the newspaper industry, what to the extent it's still newspaper industry, but the journalism industry. Kim is right. There's been a huge amount of organizing, particularly at digital outlets and among digital workers at traditional outlets. But there's also been a lot of consolidation, a lot of closures, a lot of job loss. And so what does that mean for worker power in the journalism industry?
Yeah, it's a strange dichotomy, right? At one point, you've got a new generation of young and nearing middle age labor reporters, right? Or people who are like really care about this stuff, whether they're actually labor reporters or not. They report with that, with that vision of it. And there's also the fact that there's so much consolidation and so many layoffs, right? And so many people who've lost their jobs over the last bunch of years. I mean, during COVID, during like the beginning of COVID, I lost my job. So many people lost their jobs, whether at the beginning or it was an excuse to, do some bloodletting. And so, I think that also helped inspire a lot of the organizing, right? I remember, now I'm dating myself, but back to 2012, 2013, the pivot to video, so many places just getting wiped out, and ironically I work in video now, but we never pivoted to it. We're just there. But, so many places getting wiped out, right? And I think that helped inspire, and Kim can speak to, organizing journalism and organizing journalists. And I think that helped create an environment where people started to want to organize, and that hopefully changed, and I think did change people's attitudes. And now, as there's more roll-ups of the industry, as whether it's newspapers or magazines or what have you, there is this pushback now, right? Whether it was I remember Fusion, right? They try to get rid of all those people, and they blast in the past saying that, but there's a union there, so they were able to get at least a better deal. I know Vice is trying to deal with their union is trying to deal with management there, and so there is this. The industry, I don't know the future of it, but I do know that people are more organized and willing to push back in a way they couldn't before. It felt like a lot of times you're just sort of off into the wild, right? You just cut off, and you're able to just trying to swim and trying to find a way to get a paycheck. And I've been through that myself many times before, and so I think there's definitely more solidarity there, and I think it's also to some degree helped create a better coverage of labor. I think that a lot of times for a long time there's this coverage of business as the great American enterprise is a great reason for being, and business people were the geniuses and the people who were giving so much to the world, whether it was Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos and even Elon Musk a few years ago. But I think that there's been a skepticism there, and I think that that's because they're all buffoons, but also because there's a element of you can't avoid it. You've been laid off by the Washington Post. You've been laid off by so many places. You can't avoid but to feel a certain way, or that if you've been organizing, you can't avoid that. So I do think coverage has changed. I think it needs to continue to change because there's still plenty of places that are objective in a way that just will prize management over workers, or put what they say on the same level when it's clear that Howard Schultz saying he's never done any union busting is. I don't think you need to print that, but people still do. But we're getting there, and again, the fact is, it's still a rough industry. It's still hard to make a living, but there's definitely more solidarity there, and I think that can only be a good thing.
Jordan, terrific. Michael, what do you think? Worker power inside journalism. The industry has shrunk some. It's grown in some areas. And in the areas where it's growing, it's dominated by younger workers. And is that a part of the story of the journalism industry?
I think so, and I think just there's always going to be challenges, especially with how fast everything's changed just in our lifetimes, and things on the horizon that um, are going to impact us to a certain extent, whether that's AI or things like that. And we're the media is still grappling with the fact that the big companies like Facebook and Google and Twitter and things like that, they take a bite out of media revenue, so they're profiting and operating on the work that people like us do, and you know whether it's our employers or ourselves aren't seeing much of those gains. So I think the just the opposite of that, to counter all of those challenges, all those obstacles we're facing, it has come to, like, people need to organize, people need to rely on ourselves. We've seen that in layoffs. Like Jordan Kim mentioned, what happened at Vice, BuzzFeed, the owners of Gizmodo's parent company. What they've done is really just hollowed out those newsrooms. And that's the same old story with a lot of employers, that they're going to they don't know how to work in this industry, what's best for this industry, but the people doing the reporting, the workers do. And I think it's come to people realizing that and developing different ways, whether it's organizing as freelancers or organizing newsrooms, and figuring out and learning that this job is always evolving, always changing, and the people that know the best way to improve those things and get the best out of journalism and do the work is us ourselves. So I think that's just a symptom of that kind of that growing realization, whether it's forced or just out of a necessity to all the pressures that we face.
Yeah, well, there's a radical idea that workers actually know how to do their jobs best. How about that? That's a pretty. That's somebody needs to write an article about that. I like that a lot. Okay,
It's nuts.
we're running long because of our technical challenges, but we always ask our labor reporters to finish up on one question. So just spend a sentence or two on this question, and I'll go in the line as I have you lined up: Michael, Jordan, and then Kim. So the question is this: what is the next big story in 2024 that we're not talking about? And labor story. Let me rephrase that. What is the next big labor story in 2024 that we are not talking about in 2023? Real quick, Michael?
That's a difficult question, but I think that what we're not talking about in 2023 is just next year coming to a head, all these big union campaigns. How will the NLRB respond? Because a lot of, like, Starbucks appeals, Amazon appeals, they're at their last appeal. So it's going to be, we're going to, finally see, Starbucks, lost their final appeals and not bargaining. Amazon, they're still fighting the union election that workers won in Staten Island, and they're still fighting the second rerun election in Alabama. So we'll get answers to that. And I think what happens in those cases, it's not going to get as much attention as when those things first happened. But I think how the NLRB, how the government responds, and what, if any, accountability Amazon and Starbucks and similar companies like Trader Joe's, Chipotle, that's gotten away with a lot of union busting, seeing the legal processes and their appeals finally come to a head, and whether there's going to be some resolution, that will benefit workers, or if it's just going to be like, too bad. That's the way it is. So
Yeah.
I think that's
a good one.
A big story for next year.
That's a good one. Jordan, big story in 2024. We're not talking about the biggest story in 2024. We're not talking about in 2023.
I mean, I was going to agree with Michael. Like, whether they get contracts or not, a lot of these places are it's going to be huge. Both for like those workers themselves, the ability to organize continuously. If like Starbucks ends up not having a contract that is sort of like there's so many thousands of stores that just aren't going to organize. I think also one thing I've been very intrigued by is if we look at it 2024, obviously the elections are so important. I'm very intrigued by this idea that Republicans are trying to be populist now, and they're pro worker, and obviously I don't think that's at all true. But I'm very interested to see how the rhetoric that's used, right? I know Biden, like Kim said, the one good thing that he's done, maybe the one thing he recommend a second term is another NLRB under his watchful eye. But how much that this rhetoric is going to shift, because I think that and how much like proposals are going to shift, right? Like you've seen like JD Vance try and secretly probably gut the train deal that he came up with, the railroad deal. But I'm very curious just to know like how much politicians are picking up on it, whether they are Democrats or Republicans, right? Like there is this element of like traditionally unions, support Democrats, and I think that like they have in a lot of ways, like Biden especially, I think has been good about that. But there's still plenty of them that don't. Democrats definitely don't turn out in the way that they should, and I think a lot of union members are up for grabs. And I think that like Trump tried to exploit it during the UAW thing, and he kind of got his clock clean because he went to a non-union shop with no union workers there. So that was a big fail. But we're still seeing Republicans are still powered by the Koch brothers, and I guess there's only one Koch now, the Koch guy. But I think that'll be interesting to me, like how much rhetoric changes and how much policy could change after that, because
that's intriguing. So you were not persuaded by Josh Hawley going to the picket line. You didn't, that the Republican Party has moved all the way over to be pro-union. That didn't persuade you.
I'm still learning how to be a man from him. So once I'm done with that, I'm going to see what he does with labor.
Very good. Well, maybe you could do a workshop or something. Yeah. Kim, what's the big labor story of 2024 that we're not talking about in 2023?
I certainly hope people will be talking about it. I think we'll be talking about it for the next few years, like the next decade probably. Is this idea of the just transition and what we're seeing in terms of this slow but kind of unstoppable shift towards renewable energy. I've spent the past couple years covering coal miners in the Deep South and in Appalachia, and one way to become very interested in the plans for the workers who are involved in these extractive industries as we move towards a greener future is to talk to a lot of coal miners.
Yeah.
And to talk to oil refinery workers in the Bay and in the Gulf. Like I'm interested in seeing what actual concrete solutions are going to be proposed and perhaps even implemented or offered to the workers that are going to be left behind for this. I mean, there's been some chatter about it already because of what happened with the UAW contract with the battery operating plants being pulled under their master agreement. That's a big deal. And I'm just wondering, I'm sure a lot of people smarter than me are wondering, okay, but where do we go from here? As time goes on, as the world continues to burn, we got to make some changes. We all know that, but there are still a lot of people, a lot of workers who are seeing their livelihoods kind of hang in this political balance. And I am really interested in following their stories and seeing what happens, because obviously we need to change a whole bunch of stuff, but I want to make sure that, my friends in Matewell in West Virginia aren't left behind, because there are a lot of people that have been left behind in this country, and that's how we get into these political messes that continue to consume us right now.
Yeah, and let me just say, your reporting already on that issue, I think, has been absolutely essential. It's a worker-level journalism about one of the most important issues in our society right now. Can't thank you enough for being here. Kim Kelly, you can find her at Teen Vogue, and let me just say, everywhere. She publishes everywhere. Jordan Zakarian, More Perfect Union, More Perfect US. Michael Sonato, you can find him at The Guardian. They're terrific. Read their stuff, tweet their stuff, or whatever you do on X. Post their stuff. It's terrific. It's essential. Thank you all for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Hell yeah.
Like I told you, another terrific Labor Reporters Roundtable. Thanks for joining us for it. You can stay connected to the Power at Work blog by linking up with us, following us, connecting with us on social media. The first thing you should do, though, is subscribe to the blog. go to the front page of the blog, down at the bottom, give us your name, give us your affiliation, give us your email address, and we'll keep you updated about the content that's on the blog. We'll also send you the weekly download, which is a collection of labor news from across the internet. We do that once a week. But you can also connect with us on social media, at Power at Work Blog on Twitter X, at Power at Work Blog on Threads, Power at Work Blog on Instagram, on TikTok. We have pages on LinkedIn and Facebook, Power at Work Blog. Just search Power at Work Blog. You'll find it on LinkedIn and Facebook. You can follow us in either of those places. We also post regularly on LinkedIn and Facebook. So if you follow us, you'll be able to see those posts. They will bring you back here to the blog. We'd really like to connect with you. If you have something that you think we need to be covering, we need to be talking about, if you have video or audio or something you've written that you think that we should be sharing with our audience, please connect with us. Send us a direct message through those channels, and we will take a look at it. We'll give it every due consideration, and if it's really good, we will help to get it out there. We just did that with some fabulous videos from the legal department of the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. It was great. It's getting a great response. We'd love to do that with your worker-focused, worker power-focused, union-focused material as well. So let us know about it. Send it to us, and we'll take a look at it. I promise we'll take a serious look at it. And if it's really good, we'll get it out there to our viewers. So thanks very much for joining this Blogcast. Thanks for hanging around till the very end. Really enjoyed having you here. We'll get you back on the blog real soon. Thanks.